reminded me of something we talked about before, but I want to bring it back up again because I think enough people don't do it. But it was about a mansion, and it was something about rent before you buy, but I think it was talking about that specific property. But it triggered a thought in my mind about how many buyers, in my opinion, don't rent in the neighborhood that they end up buying in. So their only experience when looking into a neighborhood is driving through it for an hour here and there. Sometimes those are at non-rush hour times. Sometimes those are times when nobody's home. So I'm a big believer, especially with Airbnb, Turo's a car rental app, Airbnb, VRBO, all these like agencies and opportunities out there that you have to rent properties short term now. I'm just a big believer that that you should do that in the neighborhood that you really want to live in, because first off, you understand the commute better. Second off, you understand kind of the rhythm of the neighborhood. I've lived or in the rhythm of the street, if you can. I've lived in neighborhoods that if you drove through at noon on a random weekday, it looks like the most peaceful thing you could ever imagine. And then at Friday at 8 o'clock, there's banjo music blasting through the whole neighborhood until 2 in the morning. So you don't get a chance to see and experience a neighborhood, and I think that's the number one mistake most home buyers make is about location. You can fix just about everything else. You can add on to a house, you can change the bath, you can do all those things. You cannot change the location. So if you're gonna spend thousands of dollars buying a home with all the costs, right, when it comes to inspections, appraisals, all these things. If you're going to spend all that money, put a little bit more money into determining the location's the right one for you. And not just location from a commute standpoint, but location as in that home's the neighborhood. Like I used to work for a private investigation company before I got into real estate in 2005. And in fact, Robert, you've sold homes for the president of that company that I used to work for. And so one of the things that I learned from that I thought was really genius from a private investigator, because I was in sales, I wasn't a private investigator, so I would go out with the private investigators and learn, and you would sit in neighborhoods for 8-10 hours a day, like watching people, right? You learn oh my goodness, this dude would know when people took their dogs out on a schedule, on a clock, when the mailman would come, who was having an affair, he would know everything in an 8-hour day. It was incredible. So I'm not saying go sit in your car for 8 hours in a day, although it may be a very worthy investment of your time, but maybe going out there for an hour or two is not such a bad idea. Walk in the neighborhood, but they would have they'd have portable air conditioning. They had all these tricks because if you left your car running, it would make people suspicious. So you had to crack your windows. You'd have fans. You'd have little weird things. You do all these things to disguise yourself, right? Because you're an investigator. You're really a lot of people don't want you there. You're legally allowed to be there. You're on a public street, but people don't want you there. But it's amazing. He would say things like, man. And one of them that I shadowed with, because I worked in Southern California, was the sales territory I had. So those were the investigators I would go out with. So imagine going to some of those neighborhoods. Yeah, boy, that was fun. But he said, what I learned, all the neighborhoods I didn't want to buy a home in, and I learned of all the neighborhoods I wanted to buy a home in, simply from doing this job, because I would be in a neighborhood. I'd be in the neighborhood for 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day sometimes for many, many, many days, and I kind of learned that, and if you just drove through for 10 minutes, it looks nice, everything's great. Well, yeah, because it's noon on Tuesday. Right. Come back Friday at 10, and see what it's like. So I learned a lot from that in terms of kind of doing your due diligence, and I think a lot of home buyers could learn a lot from that process, from just going out and kind of investigating a neighborhood. And yeah, I know you're not going to want to sit in your car for 8 hours a day and worry about how to go to the bathroom and all those things like they did. But you can do a part of that and learn a lot about a neighborhood, and too many people don't. So it's why I thought, hey, look, instead of that, Airbnb it. Find a rental that you can live in for a few days, spend a weekend there, and figure out what the rhythm of the neighborhood is like. Because again, the number one mistake I see people make when they buy a home that they have regrets about and want to sell is about the location. And people don't, there isn't an inspection process for that. There's not someone you can hire, it's something you have to do yourself. So it's just about, being responsible. So anything you guys can think about, mistakes that you've made in the location thing when you bought something, you're like, man, I wish I'd have done a little bit more checking around.
Not when I bought, but when I rented.
Yeah. What about you, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, just, future growth of an area, right? So I lived in Wesley Chapel, and, I moved there in 2005, and it was, a lot of just still farmland, and we saw cows driving home every single day. And then as it grew more and more and more and more, it got to a point where traffic was traffic.
That was the same with me out in West Hillsboro near West Chase and that area. Same problem I had until they put the toll lane in. So now it's like you got to pay extra, but now it's incredible. I remember driving up through that area not long ago on rush hour and paying to use the express lane and thinking, man, if this would have been here, I don't know if I'd ever moved because we loved the neighborhood, but that was the biggest issue, was the commute, and it was the expressway. I mean, you'd sit there for 40 minutes from like Independence to Del Mabry.
Yeah. And that's the biggest thing.
Atrocious. But now with that express lane,
they added a whole nother lane.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing that we've heard is, or that I hear people talk about, complain about, is the commute, from wherever they're going to work and everything else. So, to your point, don't just drive it Sunday afternoon. Drive it at the worst, Friday afternoon, Monday morning. Test some of those times out to know what you're dealing with, because that's the number one, complaint we hear about people, or no.
And I think staying in a house during the work week, eliminates it, because you're going to drive to work, right? You're going to see it, So, and don't do it. So here's the other thing. I've had people do it, and then they do it during the holiday.
Right.
They do it. They do it at a time when nobody's working. Right. It's like, then you're not going to learn anything from that. So we'll be back. We're going to wrap up the last second. We're going to talk interest rates and mortgage update with Mike Corrigan from Cross Country Mortgage.